The night Grace Bell lost her husband's love in front of 300 people, she smiled so no one would see her heart break. The ballroom of the Cole Tower glittered like a trap, dressed up as a party. Chandeliers dripped gold light onto marble floors. Waiters moved between guests, carrying trays of champagne nobody really needed. This was the Cole family's 20th wedding anniversary gala, and every powerful name in the city was there to watch, whisper, and wait. Grace stood near the tall windows in a navy dress that cost more than most people's rent, holding a glass she never drank from. She had learned, over 6 years of marriage to Daniel Cole, that a full glass in her hand kept people from asking why she looked so tired. Then Victor Cole took the microphone. Victor was Daniel's cousin, the one who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. He raised his glass toward the crowd, and Grace felt her stomach drop before he even opened his mouth.
To 6
years of marriage, Victor said, and still no heir. Some women bring fortune into this family. Others just bring themselves. The room laughed. Soft, polite, cruel laughter, the kind rich people use like a knife wrapped in silk. Grace did not move. She kept her spine straight and her chin level, the way her grandmother taught her back home, in a small brick house 2 boroughs away from this tower of glass and judgment. But inside, something cracked. She looked at Daniel, her husband, the man she had loved since she was 23 years old, standing in a black suit under those bright lights, and he said nothing. He did not defend her. He simply looked down at his drink, like the floor had suddenly become interesting. That silence hurt more than Victor's words ever could. Grace set her glass down on a passing tray, turned, and walked out of that ballroom with her head held high, even as her hands shook the entire elevator ride down. What none of them knew, not Victor, not the laughing crowd, not even Daniel, was that Grace Bell was about to disappear from their world completely. And when she came back, she would be holding something none of them could take from her. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Because in 3 years, this same family would be begging Grace for forgiveness in that same tower. Comment forgiveness and stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The morning after the gala, Grace packed one suitcase. She did not leave a note. She did not need to. Diane Cole, her mother-in-law, had made it clear for years that a wife who could not give the family a child was simply borrowing space in their world. Grace moved into a small apartment across the city, one Daniel didn't know existed, paid for with money she had quietly saved from her own consulting work over the years. Rumors spread fast in high society. People said Grace Bell had a breakdown. They said she'd run off with another man. They said her mind had finally snapped under the pressure of being married into a family that never wanted her. Grace let them talk. Silence, she was learning, could be its own kind of power. For 2 years, she disappeared from every camera and every gossip column. She traveled quietly to a small clinic outside the city that specialized in treatments most doctors dismissed as folk medicine. She sat with healers in the mountains who taught her to breathe again, to release years of grief her body had been holding onto like a fist. She spent months at a retreat by the coast, waking up at dawn to walk along cold sand, rebuilding herself piece by piece. It wasn't magic. It was patience and grief and hope, stitched together one difficult day at a time. Somewhere in that second year, something in Grace shifted. She stopped being the woman who flinched at whispers. She became a woman who watched, who planned, who waited with the calm of someone who finally understood her own worth. She still loved Daniel. That never changed, but she no longer needed his family's approval to know who she was. Near the end of her second year away, Daniel found her. He had hired no investigator and told no one in his family. He simply remembered a small coastal town Grace once mentioned wanting to visit when they were young and broke, and still believed love was enough. He showed up at her door unannounced, standing in the rain with his tie loosened and his eyes red from something that looked a lot like sleepless nights. He did not ask her to come home. He did not talk about the company, or his mother, or Victor. He just said he was sorry, and that he missed his wife, and that he understood if she never wanted to see him again. Grace let him in that night, not because she had forgiven the silence in that ballroom, but because the man standing in front of her, soaked and humbled, was still the boy she had fallen in love with before the Cole name ever came between them. They talked until sunrise. They cried. And for one quiet night, they were simply Grace and Daniel again, two people who had lost each other and, just for a moment, found their way back. By morning, Grace asked him to leave and give her more time. Daniel, to his credit, respected it. He flew home without telling a soul where he had been. 6 weeks later, one gray morning at the coastal retreat, a doctor called her into a small office and told her something that made her sit down before her legs gave out. She was pregnant. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth and cried for 10 straight minutes, tears of shock and joy and fear all tangled together. After 6 years of hearing she was broken, after years of being called barren in rooms full of people who smiled while they said it, her body had done what everyone said was impossible. But the doctor's next words pulled her back down to earth fast. "This is a high-risk pregnancy," he said gently. "At your age, with your medical history, we need to watch you very closely." Grace made a decision that day that would change the entire Cole family's future. She would keep this pregnancy a secret, from Daniel, from Diane, from Victor and every single person who had laughed at her in that ballroom. Not out of spite, out of protection. She knew exactly what would happen if the Cole family learned she was carrying a child before it was safely born. Diane would swoop in with doctors of her own choosing, lawyers whispering about custody, and Victor would find some way to twist even this into a threat against his inheritance. Grace needed time. She needed this baby to be strong and safe before she stepped back into that world of sharks. So she vanished even further. She rented a private cottage under a false name, hired a small trusted medical team who signed strict confidentiality agreements, and wore loose clothing whenever anyone from her old life might catch a glimpse of her online. She unfollowed old friends. She let the rumors of her breakdown grow wilder, because a woman having a mental health crisis in private was far less interesting to gossip columns than a woman quietly carrying the Cole family's one and only heir. Meanwhile, back in the city, the Cole empire moved forward without her. Diane Cole, tired of waiting for an heir that seemed like it would never come, began drafting new company bylaws. If Daniel and Grace could not produce a child within the year, controlling shares of Cole Enterprises would pass directly to Victor. It was framed as smart business. Everyone in the family knew it was really about erasing Grace completely. Daniel, drowning in grief and guilt he never spoke about out loud, signed the paperwork without much of a fight. Some nights he sat alone in his enormous house, staring at old photographs of Grace, laughing on their wedding day, wondering where exactly he had failed her. He had let his family humiliate his wife in public and said nothing. That silence haunted him more than any boardroom failure ever could. He had no idea that 300 miles away, in a small cottage by the sea, his wife's stomach was growing round with the child everyone said would never exist. The pregnancy was harder than Grace ever imagined. There were 2 nights in the hospital where machines beeped too fast and doctors spoke in low, urgent voices. There was a moment in her 7th month when she genuinely believed she might lose the baby, and she held her own hand in that hospital bed because there was no one else there to hold it for her. But Grace did not break. She had already survived worse. On a windy morning in early spring, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl, with her father's sharp jawline and her mother's steady, unshakable eyes. She named her Faith, because faith was exactly what had carried her through every dark night that led to this one. For the first few months, Grace stayed hidden with baby Faith, healing, bonding, preparing. She knew the moment was coming when she would have to walk back into that world of glass towers and cruel smiles. She just needed to choose the right moment to do it. That moment arrived on the day of the Cole Enterprises annual shareholder meeting, exactly 1 year after Victor's toast at the anniversary gala. The boardroom on the 40th floor was packed. Every major shareholder sat around the long table, and dozens more watched from the gallery above. Diane Cole stood at the head of the room in a sharp gray suit, ready to formally announce the transfer of controlling shares to Victor. Daniel sat near the front, thinner than he used to be, eyes hollow, a man going through the motions of losing everything that mattered. Victor stood beside his mother, barely hiding his smile. After careful consideration, Diane began, her voice cutting cleanly through the room, and given the continued absence of a legitimate heir, the board recommends transferring primary control of Cole Enterprises to Victor Cole, effective immediately. Papers shuffled, Pens hovered over signature lines. Then the tall glass doors at the back of the boardroom opened. Every head turned. Grace Bell walked in wearing white, calm as still water, a baby girl asleep against her chest, in a soft cream wrap. Gasps rippled through the room like a wave crashing over rock. Daniel shot up out of his chair so fast it nearly tipped over. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes moved from Grace's face to the small bundle sleeping peacefully in her arms, and something in his expression cracked wide open. "Grace," he whispered. "Is that—" "Her name is Faith,"
Her name is Faith.
Grace said, her voice steady and clear enough for every single person in that room to hear.
Her name is Faith.
She's 4 months old, and she is the daughter of Daniel Cole. Diane's face went pale as chalk. Victor's smile vanished so fast it looked like it had never existed at all. "This is absurd," Victor snapped, recovering quickly, his voice sharp with panic. "You expect us to just believe some child appeared out of nowhere and hand over the company on your word alone?" Grace turned to him with a calm that unsettled the entire room more than any shouting could have. "I don't expect you to believe anything," she said. "I expect you to test it." She placed a folder on the boardroom table. Inside was a court-ordered DNA verification, already completed weeks earlier through an independent, legally certified lab, along with signed statements from her medical team confirming the pregnancy timeline down to the exact week. Silence fell over the room like snow. The family's own lawyer, a stiff older man named Edward who had worked for the Coles for 20 years, opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and read through it twice. When he looked up, his face told the whole story before he even spoke. "It's conclusive," Edward said quietly. "The child is Daniel Cole's biological daughter, legitimate heir under company bylaws." Every mocking laugh from that anniversary gala came rushing back into that boardroom. Except now, it was the silence doing all the talking. Daniel crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped in front of Grace, his hands trembling as he reached toward his daughter, then hesitated, looking to Grace first for permission. Grace nodded, and Daniel gently touched Faith's tiny hand, tears sliding down his face without any shame. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have stood up for you that night. I should have stood up for you every night after." Grace looked at him for a long moment. She had spent 2 years learning how to survive without needing his approval, and that strength did not disappear now, just because he was crying in front of her. "You will have time to earn that back," she said softly. "But today isn't about us. Today is about her." She turned to face Diane and Victor, and for the first time in 6 years, it was Grace's voice that filled that boardroom with authority. "Effective today," she said, "as Faith's mother and legal guardian, I will be serving as interim controller of her shares until she comes of age. The board can review the full documentation with Edward this afternoon." Diane opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. There was nothing left to argue. The weeks that followed turned the Cole family's world completely upside down. The same society women who once whispered about Grace's barrenness now sent flowers and invitations, desperate to be seen close to her again. Victor was quietly removed from his executive position after the board discovered he had been mismanaging funds for years, funds he had hoped to inherit control over before anyone noticed. Diane, humbled for the first time in her life, asked to see her granddaughter, and Grace, choosing grace over revenge, allowed it, though on her own terms now. Grace didn't dismantle the Cole family out of anger. She rebuilt it. She changed the outdated company bylaws that had once threatened to erase her, replacing them with policies that protected every future mother in that family from ever facing what she had faced. She turned a boardroom that once laughed at her into one that answered to her. A year later, at the next Cole Enterprises anniversary gala, Grace stood by those same tall windows, wearing white again, holding her daughter's small hand as Faith took her wobbly first steps across that same marble floor where her mother had once smiled through humiliation. Nobody in that room dared to laugh this time. Grace looked down at her daughter, then out at the crowd that once wrote her off as nothing, and she finally understood something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Silence had not made her weak. It had made her patient. And patience, in the end, had given her everything they said she would never have.